Alright, gang. I'm going to talk about tank, range, melee, healing responsibilities, and how I'd like to initially approach the fight. Starting with hero at the beginning, because we have the boss and the mini-boss present. Each tank's going to pick up one. We need to make sure the mini-boss is faced away. So my idea is, since the boss is in the middle of the room is like a large rectangle, we'll take him up to the northwest section. And then that way we can start working out in this fashion around based on the way the ground effects and the movement is that we need. Within 30 seconds, we should have the mini-boss down. Melee, make sure that you're appropriately behind and stacked. Now, we want to make sure that also when we're moving that we try to keep them as tight as we can once we get them up there. But we have to make it so that the mini-boss is faced away from the other tank, because we don't want both tanks to be hit by his attack. Okay. Other responsibilities that the tanks have is that when the wolves get called, one tank needs to make sure that they grab up the current wolf that has overheated on it. I'm not sure what the display is going to look like involving the two, but I'm sure there'll be a pretty unique difference between which one looks like what. I would imagine an extra amount of flame, or they'll be glowing, be very orange and red. There'll be a debuff though. We need to make sure that at this point too, that wolf, once the tank has it and the pivot is done and it's in a position where it's able to be tanked by it, is in front of the melee, and so the melee can engage it. It's imperative that when the wolves are down that they die within 8 seconds of each other, and that all damage goes into them. So range will be on the one that'll be tracking onto an individual, and then the other one will be focused on by the melee that'll be with the tank. Gotta make sure that we do this swap at the right time. So basically the idea is the OH is going to drop off, so the tanks will have to do a swap on the two wolves properly, so that the other wolf gets caught by the boss tank at that point, and then the wolf tank is going to be responsible for grabbing the boss. So there'll be a little bit of a swap there, and it's going to have a really interesting pivot motion to it. We just have to watch for it, learn how to do it, and work through it. Another time too that we want to make sure that we're paying attention is the Firestorm debuff. They recommend to swap it every 4 to 5 once it starts to get to applied. So I assume that 4 to 5 is going to be between 15 and 20 seconds. And then at 40 seconds is when the debuff kicks off. So that'll be at the end once they're at 100 energy. So what we want to make sure we're paying attention for with that Firestorm is just that we rotate properly and that we don't end up getting too much of an issue. Then for range, we want to make sure that we have a 7-yard triangle. So what we're going to do is our typical triangle formation, and what we're going to want to make sure we have is 7 yards to avoid the attacks that go on and the movement mechanics that I've talked about in the previous video that you should be aware of. Heels are going to be to the outside of the triangle typically, and then we'll have 2 that will support the middle or up towards the front with melee. So that way we have a good base and we cover about 80-90 yards worth of area with heals. Big thing for range, be it healing or a range attacker, we're going to make sure that you avoid. There's going to be a lot of mechanics that are going to occur on the outside where you're going to have a responsibility where you either run up to melee, or as discussed in the previous video, you have to run up to melee, or you have to make sure that you avoid the mechanic involving like the armament, for example, that's going to create a fire zone on the floor that will be permanent throughout the encounter. We also have to make sure that when Firestorm is cast, it's basically a large mass AoE damage. So we're going to have to establish our cooldowns during that point so that we'll make sure we have proper healing coming in and we don't have overlapping. We're also going to have a loose stack of about 2 yards. So what we're going to do is have melee marked, and then everybody's going to have to run into it and take care of it, and then we'll have to expand back out into our triangle formation. Melee, you're going to have a tight stack, so we're going to have a symbol present, maybe 2, and those symbols are going to represent your stack point, but you're always going to be facing and attacking the boss from the rear. That applies to the wolves too when the wolf is active. This fight's going to have a ton of healing going on, so just watch for it. Make sure that we're doing our healing properly as far as on our melee stack group, and then individual heals as we need it. When the wolves are out, they do have a chain, a fire band that connects them, and if that band hits anything, then it puts a dot that's dispellable on the individuals that it hits. So I would assume, based on wherever it comes from, what the tank is it responsible for the boss at the time of the wolves coming out. They need to make sure that they taunt them, and then whoever ends up getting the other wolf as far as targeting them and chasing them down, we need to make sure that we have a solid pivot with it. So that way we're bringing it out this way, for example, and kind of keeping it out in this area. So as we move, it would naturally be always to the south. And then when the swap needs to happen, it'll be like tank will be able to swap there, tank will be able to tank there, and then the other one's going to target somebody, and then that person just has to pay attention and move properly. But when the wolves are out, all damage has to be present, because if you get a combination of the wolves and the other effect at 75% energy, you're basically going to have just a tornado of damage, and it pretty much equals a wipe, because it's just going to be AoE damage all over the place. And since we're going to have one wolf near melee to begin with, to start burning it down, and the other range is going to be working on it, what we're going to want to do is make sure that we're promptly attacking the wolves as fast as we can and eliminating them. So wolves take priority over all other aspects. And then we need to make sure, too, that we try to avoid as much damage, and this applies for heals. Now, if this doesn't work out here, we can try other things, since really the main pivot point is going to be the tanks and the boss. We could always try something where, like, we're putting a bunch of stuff here, and then the tanks can pivot down, and we can do the opposite. We can go counterclockwise instead of clockwise. So what I initially want to try is where we move across, and then kind of move down, and kind of pivot and turn. So we do like a U. If that doesn't work, then what we can do is range can move into where the tanks are, since all the armaments and damage will be here. Tanks can move into here, and then can start pulling them across, and we'll be like boom, 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 until eventually we have the entire move forward, the target's done. Now remember that consistently, as far as the damage that goes out, it's going to be scaled based on the amount of energy. So we just have to adjust and get used to the 4 mini phases as each one of the energies stack, and to pay attention for the effects as they go on. If you like the video, please click like below. Remember, we'll be streaming on Twitch Scion35 tonight on our attempts involving normal. And I'll be posting more videos. I have martial arts training that I have to hit up in a little bit, and then I'll be transitioning back to lead that. So if you're interested, you can watch and see how our strategies end up working out. And I appreciate it. Again, thanks for watching.